Bill Wirtz from the Consumer Choice Center, backing up with me tonight here on the Final Five. Hey, Bill, it's good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this specifically because prescription drugs, it has been a linchpin campaign topic for Democrats for years. President Trump has signed this executive order, and what do we know so far about it? And in your estimation, is this the way to go?
Well, so the thing is that he kicked the ball sort of to RFK, because what he says is essentially HHS will have to figure out how to exactly implement this. They seem to be a fan of the system of most favored nation pricing. A lot of European countries, I think, believe almost all European countries do this, where they essentially benchmark drug prices against a set of other countries. So they say we always will want to be, let's say, for instance, 10% cheaper than Romania. We want to be 15% cheaper than Switzerland. And the thing is, like, well, if you think this through, if all countries in the world did this, it would be a race to the bottom, and ultimately no pharmaceutical company would be trying to sell any more drugs. So this is one of the problems with this type of approach. I think ultimately what the Trump administration tries to do here is do something about inflation by reducing drug prices. If you reduce drug prices, you get overall inflation down. So you get a short-term win with that sort of approach. The problem is in the long run. In the long run, if a lot of these pharmaceutical companies don't get the return on investment, they don't put it into the research of new drugs. Just think about this. Would you want to be sick while using the drugs of 40 years ago? If you don't have medical innovation, that might be one of the consequences of this type of policy, and that's, I think, what we should worry about.
That nexus of inflation and drug prices was something that came up during the Biden era with the Inflation Reduction Act at the time, where they picked a certain number of drugs up for negotiation. You know, you're right. I have seen the ads for well over a year or so, behooving lawmakers to say, hey, if you cap drug prices, this might stymie innovation along the way. But this is also something that for years the likes of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they've championed similar things here. So is there a difference between the way that those Democrats have looked at it and what President Trump is doing right now?
I think that's the most fascinating aspect of this, is that this is essentially a Bernie Sanders policy under a Trump administration. Now, Bernie Sanders does have his differences. So unlike RFK Jr., he's supported the vaccine, and they have quite a few differences on sort of the implications of medical innovation. So Bernie Sanders still tries to champion medical innovation, but still believes that drug pricing caps are the way to go about this. So there's an interesting alignment here that happens on a lot of these health fronts, and we'll get to some of the other ones, I'm sure. But there's an interesting alignment here. But ultimately, countries that really try to do this most severely always fail. The thing is, ultimately, if you are very sick, you best very sick in the United States. If you're a cancer patient, you don't travel to Bulgaria to get treatment. You are best served to be in the United States. So yes, there's a factor where it's a bit unfair. You can say it's a bit unfair that Europeans have essentially subsidized drug prices through the fact that American patients pay more. However, American patients also get access to medical innovations first, because that's where they are on the market first. That's where a lot of the research happens. So I think there's something to be done about drug pricing, but capping it just with, in economics, it doesn't work out.
Bill, we're just about out of time, but I want to talk about Casey Means. She is the president's new nominee for Surgeon General. She replaced Dr. Jeanette Ishawat, who seemed to run afoul of many people in the president's movement. They didn't like her COVID approach, which was wear a mask and get vaccinated. What do we know about Casey Means?
Well, I mean, she says a lot of things about nutritional policy and health policy. She tries to connect the two, and she doesn't have an active medical license, will probably be a problem when it comes to all the hearings and all of that thing. But ultimately, she makes the case that we need to do more about preventive care and the way Americans exercise and eat, which, on the face of it, there's nothing wrong with that. Right. The thing is that the stats she brings out are sometimes a bit complicated. If I have just enough time to get into just one of them, she says, for instance, with every additional serving of ultra-processed foods, you increase your chance of early mortality by 18%. If that were true, with all the breakfast cereal I've eaten, I think I would be dead by now. And so the problem with a lot of these nutritional studies is that they make a linear connection on risk. What they don't do is experimental studies. Nutritional science is complicated because you cannot do an experimental group where people don't eat sugar for 20 years.
Bill, we got to go. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
And the Final Fight is back after this.